Over the last few weeks, we, the Music Mongoose community, have been trying to crown the best artist or band of the 60s, in what has become quite a heated tournament. You've been voting on rounds of randomly selected matchups and leaving some hilarious and sometimes quite offensive comments. And yes, the best of those comments are going to appear in this video. Now, this is part 2 of the tournament. If you haven't watched part 1, go and watch that first, then come back here to find out who the overall winner is. I'll pop part 1 up in the corner up there, or it might be up there. Is it? I think it's up there, yeah. And with that, we are into the quarterfinals. The Beatles, Pink Floyd, Bob Dylan, James Brown, the Beach Boys, The Who, Creedence Clearwater Revival, and the Rolling Stones all remain in the competition. But how will they do in the next rounds? First up, the Beatles and Pink Floyd both did very well in the initial matchups, but how are they going to do against each other? And probably as expected, a lot of love for the Beatles off the bat. Pink Floyd is my favourite, but no group equalled or topped the Beatles. The Beatles, and it's not even close. Matthew Blanchard says this: no matter who your favourite band from the 60s was, in this category you have to pick the Beatles. Without them, the 60s music scene would be a whole lot different. Just think about it. After every Beatles album, they pushed the envelopes further, and every other band at the time pushed harder to catch up and produce something better, and many did. But without the Fab Four who started the ball rolling in the 60s, music would be a whole lot different. I mean, that is a brilliant point, Matthew, thank you. Meech Neek says Beatles, hands down, no other band even close. Love Floyd, but the Beatles are the greatest band of all time. Impact, creativity, artistry, the Beatles are unmatched. Songs like A Day in the Life broke the mold. No band has ever been able to come up with a song like that, only the Beatles could, when you have two geniuses like Lennon and McCartney asking for sounds never... Please use grammar. A full stop would not go amiss there. Scott Douglas says Pink Floyd is my favourite band now and has been for many years, but I wouldn't have been who I am without the Beatles first. Some people did rally for Pink Floyd though. The Piper at the Gates of Dawn is better than all Beatles albums. To which Hognaut replies, no. Pink Floyd is definitely the better band, but in terms of what was released in the 60s, the Beatles are better. The better band? Sorry, no. Yes, they are better. There is no freaking way the Beatles are better than Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd is a way better band. Please don't even bother. Ridiculous statement. I totally agree, Pink Floyd are so much better. Beatles were more influential to British music, but were far better musicians and were an amazing live band. I never listen to the Beatles, I find them pretty boring now. Where Pink Floyd still offers so much more musically. Timeless. Exactly, Beatles were way more influential, but as far as musicianship, Floyd smokes them. I'll take almost any Floyd album against theirs any day. The Beatles were copycats of the Crickets. The Beatles suck. Cool story, bro. And some people were maybe just a bit confused. Where are Queen? So I replied, this is a tournament to crown the greatest 60s band or artist. And Pedro replied, okay, thanks. As expected though, the Beatles, once again proving their unbeatableness, powered through and won, which brings us to round 2 of the quarterfinals, Bob Dylan versus James Brown. Scott Douglas says, I've seen Dylan 3 times. The first 2 concerts were mind-blowing. By the 3rd time, I felt he was too old to pull it off. But I understand his legendary status in terms of being a performer, in addition to his massive catalogue of classic songs. Mandra Harley says, James Brown was the consummate entertainer. Period. Chicken Twisty says, not voting on this one, they're completely different styles. That's the spirit. Thanks for playing along, Chicken Twisties. Jay Clark is back. He says, I don't like BD at all. He seems like an arrogant jerk. To which Rusty Bear says, what's that got to do with the question? To which Jay Clark says, it means I didn't vote for him. That's what. I love these exchanges, they're brilliant. Mark Stevens says, no. Bob was most likely the best songwriter at the time. Although he didn't have the best voice, he was writing songs about current events and politics, rather than living in a yellow submarine. Nothing against the Beatles whatsoever, however, I'll take Dylan as the better lyricist. Where are Paul, John and George? 2 things strike me about this comment. Firstly, what about Ringo? Why did you leave him out? And secondly, there's something about this account that makes me think that they're gonna vote for the Beatles no matter what. I'm not sure what it is, I can't quite put my finger on it. Anyhow, Bob Dylan sails through this matchup, advancing to the semi-finals with 75% of the vote. And next, fighting for a place in those semi-finals, the Beach Boys versus The Who. Now that's a tough one. Anthony says both are classic and timeless, but honestly, The Who made Quadrophenia, so The Who. They did, but not in the 60s. If you include their 70s albums, I'd definitely go with The Who. That's when they recorded their best material. Who's next? Quadrophenia. King Bucky Duck 5669 says, if you base this poll solely on their work in the 60s, it's definitely the Beach Boys. If we include The Who's 70s material, which we're not, Who's Next is a fire album. David Duran says, Who? The Active Psycho says, tough one. The Who didn't do anything I don't like in the 60s. The Beach Boys did lots. But then the Beach Boys did way more top draw stuff than The Who, so I can't pick. And similarly, that one is too difficult to pick between. They are both GOATs in their own right. That means greatest of all time, by the way. And too different to be put up against each other. Cannot vote on those two against each other. Each would win against almost any other band. Well, yeah, they have. That's how the tournaments worked. William says, music isn't a competition. To which I said, that's the spirit. Kevy Nova says, I know this is an unpopular opinion, but I rate The Who above Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and Queen. I think only the Beatles were the better band. Well, luckily for you, Kevy, The Who managed to top the Beach Boys and have gone through to the semi-finals. The Who took 60% of the vote. It's the final matchup in the semi-finals then, and it's CCR versus the Rolling Stones. Oh look, our best friend, Normal C, has come back to comment. CCR was truly great, but the Stones were not just great, they were, and still are, legendary and game changers, incorporating blues into rock with soul and lightning that no other band has equaled to this day. Glad to see most others recognize this too. Garrett says CCR, no contest. I thought his profile picture was Abe Lincoln for a minute then, but no, it's not. Dean says, that was a hard one, but I chose the Stones over CCR because of their longevity, but both have produced some great and timeless music. Blue Duber 9194, I love these usernames, says big love to Creedence, who are awesome, but come on, we're talking about the Stones. Chicken Twisties is back, who says, the Stones are boring. Well, that's an unpopular opinion, it appears, because the Rolling Stones took 70% of the vote. And that leads us to the semi-finals in the Music Mongoose competition tournament to find the best band or artist of the 60s. I need to come up with a catchier title. The Beatles, Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones, and The Who. But who are going to go through to the final? And we'll start with Bob Dylan versus the Beatles. It's an interesting matchup because Bob Dylan heavily inspired the Beatles in their early work. Nick Pryor says, I mean, let's not even suggest that Bob Dylan's impact on music wasn't incredibly significant, but it's the Beatles. They're not my favourite band, but I think everyone can agree on just how incredible and important they were. Tape 2 says Dylan has one long, whiny kind of sound. The Beatles have like 8 different sounds. I mean, that's true. The Beatles did sort of reinvent their sound over and over again in their career, didn't they? Tracy says Dylan was a visionary genius who has a songbook that will be an inspiration for generations. But the Beatles not only influenced popular music, but fashion, the cinema, and popular culture. Even music videos had their roots in the Beatles. John Cunningham says when compared to serious musicians, Diane fades. Let's assume he meant Dylan. That pesky L key can be quite elusive sometimes. Oh, he's back again! Our friend, Normal C. He's been following this competition very closely, hasn't he? Dylan is most definitely not overrated. He is a genius/poet who had tremendous output of lyrical songs, and though his voice is not as classically pleasant, it is a truly unique and often imitated one, even by John Lennon and Bowie. That said, the Beatles influenced every band and artist that came after them, even including Dylan himself. Have to go with the Beatles as the greatest band/artist of all time. Dylan ranks right next to them in the top 5 all time with the Stones, Pink Floyd, and Bowie, in my opinion. Kaleidoscope says Dylan is overrated. Gorgeous6737 says, neither. Little Miss Dirtbag says Bob Dylan didn't waste his time singing monkey pop. Looking back now, the Beatles are embarrassing. Bob was a legend who actually sang about things that mattered. Not some punk little band singing about she loves you, yeah, 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 yeah. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. We get the idea. How effing long did it take them to come up with that? Bob all day long. And then Aaron says, sorry, but you're inherently wrong. Try a song like Revolution 1 and tell me it's about something that did not matter. Arguments aside, the Beatles won in a landslide victory in this round. 91% of the vote going their way. Who will join the Beatles in the final though? It's the Rolling Stones versus The Who. Kevy says better lead vocals, The Who. Better harmony vocals, The Who. Better guitar playing, The Who. Better bass playing, The Who. Better drumming, The Who. Better songwriting, The Who. More hits, the Rolling Stones. He also says, let me put it this way, I've been playing in working bands since 1989. Every band covers the Stones because they are easy. Few bands cover The Who because Moon, Entwistle and Daltrey are not easy to cover. Francisco says, the Stones started before, made more records and used more instruments. Dulcimer, harpsichord, marimba, mellotron, sitar. Kevy pipes up again, who says The Who used horns, piano, organ, synth, ukulele, banjo. To which Francisco says, but not in the 60s. Oh, that's a good comeback. The talent in The Who doesn't even come close. A lead player of each instrument, not to mention they have the legendary Marshall amplifiers first produced upon their request. Loudest concerts in history. First rock opera. And a damn good one. The Stones are a great band and are very popular, but under the iceberg, nowhere close to The Who. The Who has way better albums than the Stones. Very close, but I would go with The Who. Despite that though, the Stones take the victory here, sending them through to the final with the Beatles. What a massive surprise. Who saw that coming? Definitely not me. Quick shout out to Jay Moses, who says, okay, let me spoil the ending for you. The Stones and Beatles meet in the finals. The Beatles win, the end. Yeah, but it's a bit of fun, isn't it? Come on, get in the mood. So then, the big one, the final, the Rolling Stones versus the Beatles. Who will be crowned the greatest of the 60s, as chosen by the Music Mongoose YouTube community? Which, by the way, if you want to join, click subscribe below. Tara Ann says, the Beatles changed music and the world. Gail says, the Beatles, thank you. Bluey Dahila says, the Beatles are unbeatable. User QJ3CO, you get the idea. Rolling Stones for live band, but the Beatles are on another level. Again, it's that Beatles live element that comes back into play, isn't it? Because after all, the Rolling Stones are still performing today, amazingly. Daniel says, I'm more of a Stones fan, but the Beatles really were the most defining band of the 60s. Come on, the Beatles set a standard that all other bands tried to follow. Guessing they meant follow. The Beatles will also be the greatest band in history! Both super groups, but gotta give the edge to the Beatles for their songwriting and scope of work in about 7 to 8 years. I dig the Stones because they play more blues and their longevity. Rudolph says the Kinks. Not how this works. What? Meechneek says Fab Four, hands down. Smith says no doubt the Beatles. When you do the 70s, Zeppelin will rightfully win. Whoa. Getting a bit ahead of ourselves, aren't we? Who says I was going to do a video about the best band of the 70s? In all seriousness though, would you like to see one on the 70s? Comment down below. Robert has a very interesting take on this. This is complicated. Early 60s, I'd say the Beatles, but I like the Stones' early stuff better. Satanic Majesty's Request is considered a throwaway album, but I like it better than Sgt. Pepper. Now that is a controversial statement. Brian Jones playing all those instruments was brilliant. It's more interesting. But by 68 and 69, especially with Mick Taylor and Keith transforming their sound, the Stones were a lot better. Live is the truest way. Listen to Get Your Yayas Out and compare it to the rooftop concert. Stones were on a different level. The Beatles opened the door in the early 60s, but the Stones left the 60s better than ever. As you said, yes, it was a complicated matchup, but the people have spoken nonetheless. And in a shocking turn of events, with 100% of the vote, the Rolling Stones have beaten... No, I'm joking. The Beatles won. The Beatles won. Was that a surprise to anyone? Probably not. But there you go. The Beatles won. The Rolling Stones came second. And so we come to the end of this tournament to crown the best band of the 60s. And we can conclude 3 things. We haven't really learned anything. The Beatles are still the best band of the 60s, and people on YouTube don't seem to understand the concept of a tournament. Let me know if you'd like to see another one of these video series on the 70s, and make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you can comment and vote on the polls when they come out. For the meantime, here's a playlist of all the Beatles videos I've ever done on this channel. As it turns out, it's a lot. Have fun!